On September 11, 2001, 3 steel-frame skyscrapers were totally destroyed. The official reason, we were told, was because fire triggered a gravity collapse, even though fire had never brought down any steel-frame high-rise before. Many said a gravity collapse was impossible. Instead, they believed they were brought down intentionally, using a mix of explosives and incendiaries. One high-tech explosive is called nanothermite. Kevin Ryan, a chemist and top 9/11 researcher, not only made nanothermite, but pointed to many documents that describe it as a sol-gel material with twice the energy output of high explosives. Red-gray chips of nanothermite were found in dust samples from Ground Zero. This powerful new explosive could be applied as paint. Elevator upgrades and renovations on many floors allowed easy access to install this new explosive under the guise of construction. Dr. Judy Wood also said a gravity collapse was impossible, but rather than explosives, she claims directed energy weapons, or DEWs, were used to bring down all those buildings. She wrote a big beautiful book titled, Where Did the Towers Go? Evidence of Directed Free Energy Technology on 9/11. She wrote, 9/11 was a demonstration to the world of a new technology known as free energy. Free energy is an unconventional energy source that is not metered and sold for profit. And the data shows that the technology used on 9/11/01 is capable of producing free energy for the world. She concludes, that is, the destruction was caused by energy that is directed and used as a weapon, as in the phrase directed energy weaponry, or DEW. Exactly what energy was directed, where it came from, and how much was needed is never explained. Dr. Wood dismissed all the evidence of the nanothermite found. The Twin Towers were steel structures with aluminum cladding, so it's natural and to be expected that materials the building were made of would be found in the nanodust of their remains. The natural formation of even ordinary thermite at the specific ratio needed, let alone the special matrix of explosive nanothermite made in a lab, is impossible to form naturally because that defies the second law of thermodynamics. It's like saying if you toss its ingredients into a pile, a wedding cake will naturally pop out. Despite the impossibility, Dr. Wood is saying that all those chips of explosives found in the dust formed naturally and was to be expected. Another thing found in the dust was a high percentage of iron microspheres, which is a natural byproduct of a thermitic reaction. To explain those iron-rich spheres, Dr. Wood suggests other causes. Spheres were found in the dirt from the 1908 Tunguska event in Siberia. Expeditions sent to the area in the 1950s and 1960s found microscopic silicate and magnetite spheres in siftings of the soil. Although various theories about the cause have been proposed, including Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower, a meteorite, an antimatter weapons test, none have been conclusive. An antimatter weapon? In Siberia? In 1908? 3 months before Henry Ford sold his first Model T and the Russian army was using horse cavalry? She's implying that whatever made those spheres in 1908 could be the same source that made those spheres in the dust at Ground Zero. Another possible source, she explains, could be from the same force that makes crop circles. Iron-rich magnetic spheres have also been found in the coatings on plants and inside of plants where crop circles have appeared. Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley made over 200 crop circles. Did they also make iron-rich spheres in the process? She wrote, there's no proof of concept for the thermite hypothesis. In the case of thermite in the WTC towers, such a proof of concept has never been laid out.
Can thermite of any type burn through steel beams?
What do you think? Dr. Wood said the evidence points to Hutchinson effects. By using radio frequency and electrostatic generators, Hutchinson obtains his own effects in a volume of space where fields intersect and interfere. She says it also points to cold fusion, a nuclear reaction at room temperature claimed, but still not viable. Of course, there are known energy weapons like this system. Regardless of type and viability, significant equipment is required. Any weapon would have to be very powerful to do any real damage. Because those towers had massive steel core columns and over 200 perimeter columns bolted together in sections. There was about 100 acres of concrete floors for each tower that were pulverized into powder. The question is, what energy was used to blow these towers out and pulverize all that concrete? Dr. Wood dismisses all controlled demolition theories by incorrectly assuming its definition. This in itself rules out a conventional controlled demolition, where a building is knocked off its supports and thereafter slams to the ground. But all controlled demolitions are not the lower supports that are blown out followed by a slamming to the ground. It's a well-planned systematic cutting of the structure's key supports on many levels, breaking the structure into smaller fragments, so there is no single massive impact. She notes the lack of damage to the bathtub, which is a deep wall around the tower's foundations. In short, the bathtub evidence itself is powerful testimony that the official story of the Twin Towers pancaking down and slamming into the bathtub is precisely that, a story that fails to fit the evidence. This means, logically, that the controlled demolition model cannot be true either. Logically, her understanding and dismissal of all controlled demolitions is wrong. She's right that the floors were not stacked up like a gravity collapse. That's because the towers were blown out in a huge 600-foot radius, which explains both the lack of stacked floors and lack of large seismic impact. You need to look outside the tower's footprints to find all the debris. Dr. Wood shows pictures and offers her interpretation of motion, but sometimes it's hard to understand motion with just a picture. Here's Rick on the trampoline. Is he going up or down? How can you tell? And here's Dr. Wood claiming that most of the material went up.
Because you were saying the dust all went down, and I'm saying the dust goes up, and I'm using this picture to emphasize that it goes up.
She repeats this claim in her book. The picture in Figure 100 illustrates that the dust clouds produced by the destruction of WTC-1 went up, in marked contrast to the results of conventional controlled demolition. Smoke rises, but is most of the material really going up? Or is it blowing out and down? What do you think? In real estate, the number one rule is location, location, location. It's the same with the net force acting on objects. You may not know its cause, but you know its source and its direction by the motions observed. This most basic issue is never explained by Dr. Wood. Let's figure out where the force from her energy weapons must have been located. You know the location of whatever did this was from inside that concrete block. And the location of the force that did this was under the water. If we trace the paths back from any group of accelerating objects, we can locate the initial source of the force that caused the accelerations observed. Look at that picture on the cover of that big, beautiful book. All that smoke and dust is either moving up, out, or down, but away from where the tower stood. The forces that propelled all that out and away must have come from inside the tower itself. If the force was from a dew, they must have been placed inside the towers. Because the towers were not a pressure vessel building up steam from outside heat and then blowing. And that force didn't come from a satellite or a nearby building because the force would have to sneak through the walls or roof first without damage and then activate, blowing the towers out and away from its footprint. No, the force that did this was an inside job. What do you think? She wrote, "When I saw the airplane-shaped hole in one of the buildings, I began to laugh, in spite of the tragedy of the event, because I was reminded of watching a Roadrunner cartoon."
We laugh at, I don't know if you have the cartoons, Roadrunner cartoons?
Yeah.
Yeah, you just laugh then.
Yeah.
Because they're funny, because they're impossible.
Yeah.
Things that are impossible, you tend to giggle at. That's just the human response. And I looked at it like, somebody's playing a joke on us. This
Right.
can't be for real.
What did the eyewitnesses observe that day? Did they see an airplane hit the tower? Did they hear an airplane? Did they see airplane parts? Throughout my reading, I kept looking for evidence that an airplane had crashed into the building. She never says that planes hit the towers. Instead, she says when the tower got its holes. She defines got its hole as referring to the moment when something left an airplane-shaped silhouette of passage in a building created a hole in it. Maybe she thinks that because aluminum is softer than steel, a plane could not have punched through the tower's columns.
What got to me was that upper wingtip slot. There was a 5-inch deep slot cut into the building. This can hold the lights on the end, but it can't slice a steel column.
Well, first, the wingtip did not cut the box columns. It only cut the aluminum cladding. Second, parts of the plane were found at ground zero. Not everything on a plane is aluminum. The perimeter wall segments were bolted together, and many of those segments broke the bolts, blew inward on impact with all that mass. Can a softer material go through a harder material? Well, it depends on how fast a softer material is moving. Lead and copper normally won't go through a steel plate, but it will punch right through using my rifle. A ping pong ball can blow right through a paddle. Can water cut through steel? Again, it all depends on its velocity. She points out the impact of WTC-1 causes vibration that dampens out after about 18 seconds. That is, when WTC-1 got its hole, the building vibrated like a tuning fork. What could cause that vibration of the towers immediately after they got their hole? Maybe the thing that left an airplane-shaped silhouette of passage in the side of the towers and caused the towers to vibrate was an airplane slamming into it about 500 miles an hour? What do you think? Dr. Wood also found a correlation between the magnetic field strength in Alaska and the timing of the holes and collapse of the buildings. All 6 magnetometer values declined and then reversed directions just at the moment when WTC-1 got its hole. Variations in Earth's field readings are not that unusual and can be affected by several things, including space weather and the proximity of lightning storms. There can be significant variations of measurements on many days. Were there anomalies in the Earth's magnetic field in Alaska around the same time as some key events in New York on 9/11? Probably. Was this correlation caused by whatever made those holes in the towers? What do you think? Prior to and during the tower's fall, many heard explosions.
We was in the explosion. We was in the lobby and the third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
We watched the first explosion.
Of the explosion, just the explosion.
It sounded like gunfire, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden, 3 big explosions.
Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah,
as if they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
You want to call your mother or something?
Dr. Wood doesn't think these people really heard bombs because of the difficulty with installation, ignition temperature issues, and besides, cell phones would have set them off. She reminds us about those orange warning signs near blasting sites. The signs are to avoid premature detonation by stray signals from electronic devices during the preparation of the site. Since there were so many cell phones, the risk of setting off bombs would have been high. But the concern for errant radio transmissions only applies to electronic detonators. Non-electronic detonators are used for building demolitions. Dr. Wood also explains that everything that goes boom is not necessarily a bomb. Consider what happens to a raw egg when cooked in a microwave oven. This leads us to the testimony of exploding Scott packs. Scott packs, portable air tanks for firemen, frequently exploded for no visible reason. Why didn't these people realize that all the explosions they heard were just their portable air tanks exploding for no visible reason? Dr. Wood studied the people who fell from the towers and didn't believe they jumped because of the heat or smoke. She points out one man removing his pants while hanging out the window. Either way, when looking at the picture of the people dangling outside the building in Figure 30, we may reasonably conclude that they were doing so because of some necessity, and also that they were removing their clothes because of some necessity. Consider what might be expected if some sort of energy field, such as a microwave field, had been affecting that area just inside the building. She deduced that their clothes must have been wet, and in either case, wet clothing intensifies the pain caused by such microwaves. She noted that the person falling here in figure 26 is at a fairly substantial distance from the building. The question is this: how did he get this far from the building? Let us consider the world record for the standing broad jump, which was 11 feet 6 inches, set in 1906. This implies an energized launch by all the jumpers unless wind currents immediately pulled them away from the building. She then jumps to the conclusion, thus the actions of people appearing to disrobe while hanging outside the building are consistent with there being an energy field contained within the walls of the building. And later says, perhaps the outer aluminum cladding on the towers might itself have acted as kind of a microwave oven grating to keep whatever kind of energy was locked inside of it, and building up an energy field, kind of a standing wave that could, literally, turn the buildings into powder. Exactly where that big microwave oven was hidden remained unexplained. Dr. Wood noticed many small anomalies and assigned clever names to describe them.
Will involve, I guess the term you use is dustification of metal, or I guess another way you could get rid of it.
We're trying to invent a new word.
Yeah, might as well, right?
Poof, yeah.
Attention to detail is important for any investigation, and relevant details can be critical. On the other hand, like those reading tea leaves, one can put undue meaning into meaningless minutiae. She didn't believe this was simply a piece of red-hot steel. This is called the Cheeto picture because the orange object in the lower left corner looks like a Cheeto. A still picture of the South Tower in the process of being blown up she called a snowball. The snowball-shaped dust cloud forms and expands. She was perplexed with the fine concrete dust being kicked up. I call these fuzzballs. Dust this fine could not have settled from the air so quickly. The breakdown of particulate matter was occurring because some other mechanism was in play. In some photos, the towers appear to be blowing smoke rings. This is unnatural for regular fires, she claims. Here are some odd swirls and twirls. Could this be the result of directed energy, or maybe a weird Hutchinson effect? Or is it just smoke from some old smoldering hay? She observes that some wall segments were bent in the weak direction, rather than from compression, making them look like rolled-up carpets. If high explosives blew out the tower walls, wouldn't the horizontal force bend those segments just like that, and twist some box columns? She points to beams that look like poured cake batter, and some that look like a limp lasagna noodle. She suspects the Tesla-Hutchinson effect, changing the molecular structure in just one area of a material, can produce anomalous bending of the kind shown. Is it possible that the cake batter and limp lasagna noodles could have been from extremely high temperatures, like from a thermitic reaction? What do you think? Appendix C in the FEMA report described steel that was attacked by sulfur causing intergranular melting. The source of that sulfur was considered one of the deepest mysteries. According to Dr. Wood, the picture below tells a story of extraordinary deterioration that can best be described as molecular dissociation. Why is this steel as thin as tissue paper and curled like a tortilla chip, she asks. What type of energy field could develop the extreme types of vorticular bending and damage found in these photos? Besides molecular dissociation and energy fields, could high temperatures from a thermate reaction cause intergranular melting and make the steel thin as tissue paper? Prior to their fall, there appeared to be what the average person would call smoke. But that's not smoke, according to Dr. Wood. She coins the word lather to describe all that white and gray puffy stuff on the side of the towers in Building 7. Careful analysis of photographs shows evidence of what I call lathering up of buildings in the WTC just prior to their going poof. With the lathering and rumbling, it must be that we are in the presence of another mechanism, one that was not recorded on local seismographs, but that the firemen clearly felt. Again, this is consistent with the types of effects one obtains when interfering fields of electromagnetic energy within a zone or region. This looks like lather. Could it be caused by electromagnetic fields, Hutchinson effects, cold fusion, or maybe free energy? Or is it just smoke from smoldering hay that the cows won't eat? Building 7 fell late in the day. No plane hit it. The first thing to drop was the penthouse. That means a destructive force had to have cut the internal columns first. Were directed energy weapons hidden inside to selectively cut those internal columns before all the rest? Or is it possible that is the first step of a controlled demolition? Let's look at the fall of the North Tower. The very first thing to move down was its antenna. That antenna was supported by 47 core columns and a hat truss. The fact that the antenna fell before the perimeter has been confirmed by David Chandler, another top 9/11 researcher. This means that all core columns had to have been cut by some force fractions of a second before the perimeter walls. If they were all cut by dues, these weapons must have been hidden inside the towers. Because if the dues were located outside, any energy would have to pass through the exterior walls or roof without causing damage, and then selectively attack just those core columns. Wouldn't it have been much simpler to hide explosives on the core columns during the elevator upgrades? What do you think? There were many areas where it looked like explosive squibs were blasting out in front of the demolition wave. But not according to Dr. Wood, who explains, air tanks and water tanks were not located on every floor, but were spaced consistently throughout the height of each tower. During the destruction, the tower's air tanks and water tanks were ruptured, which would send their contents squirting outward at speeds relative to the pressures in the tanks. Did directed energy weapons on those floors cause those air tanks and water tanks to explode prematurely? Were there air or water tanks even located on those floors? Look at this. Once again, the force to blow that material out had to come from inside. Would you agree? Were those energy weapons of mass destruction hidden inside the towers? If so, like those in Iraq, the towers' WMDs were never found either. On the other hand, maybe the force that blew this material out came from explosives? What do you think? Dr. Wood invents the word dustify, defined as a general catch-all term of turning the building into dust. She writes, the majority of the building and its contents dissolved into dust before hitting the ground. Apparently, any dustification was selective because a lot of the steel wasn't affected. She says the steel wasn't evaporated by heat. She points to videos of falling steel trailing white material, then apparently vanishing into dust.
It turns to dust.
Steel is mostly iron, and iron filings are black. As the steel is falling, shouldn't we see some color change as they were turned into powder in midair? The force from one due from the inside must have launched the steel out and away. And once outside, she claims, solid pieces of the building can be seen dissolving into dust as they fall. Was a second weapon used to dustify the steel as it fell, since the first one that launched it out was likely destroyed? Since so many chunks of steel were blowing out on all sides, was just one dustification weapon used to hit them all, like Tom Knapp shooting clays? Or was it attacked in a crossfire from above, like the USS Liberty in '67? Or was it dustified from a hidden dew microwave oven with its dial set to free-fall steel? She wrote, we are looking at signs of a force instead that turned the building into dust before it even had a chance to get to the ground. Shouldn't any force of dustification alter the falling path of all that steel, maybe like a cue ball breaking? But what if her fundamental premise of free-fall steel turning to dust is wrong? What if that steel was rotating as it fell, trailing white smoke like this? Here's another video showing that same piece doing exactly that. That steel didn't turn to dust. It's rotating while falling through all the exploded concrete dust and trailing white smoke. She also points to the final fall of the core columns, also called the spire. During the final seconds of the destruction of WTC-1, a section of core columns remained rigid and standing upright after the rest of the building was gone. Then they simply turned to dust. Did they? Before the fall, something cut some columns, making them tip over like a tree. Was that from a laser beam? Or could it just be explosive cutter charges?
The job of the shape charge is to cut steel H-beams.
The way we do this is by cutting the beam at an angle, which, through a series of beams cut at the same angle, will tend to make the building shift over and walk.
Here's that spire walking sideways, then falling down. It didn't turn to dust after all. What if cutter charges were placed every few dozen feet, chopping it into segments, then falling through its own explosive smoke? Sort of like this smoky stick. Dr. Wood wrote, "So if it was not shipped to China overnight, where did it go? Very little of it was left on the ground at the disaster site. It had to be dustified and suspended in the air. Were these people covered in steel dust? Or does it look more like concrete and drywall dust? If the steel was dustified but not melted or vaporized, there should be plenty of evidence of it. There was evidence of iron-rich spheres, but no evidence of steel dust was ever found." She claims bombs do not turn buildings into powder. They only break them into chunks that in turn must slam to the ground. High explosives cannot make dust? These bombs made a lot of dust. In using her definition of dustification, which is a general catch-all term of turning the building into dust, even these buildings got dustified without explosives. Maybe high explosives can dustify a building? She also doesn't believe that there was much steel at Ground Zero. From day one of clearing Ground Zero, around-the-clock photos of the demolition were taken. Did you see any photos of 3,000 truckloads of steel being driven away? Neither did I. But there's plenty of photos of Ground Zero showing lots of steel. According to FEMA, more than 350,000 tons of steel were extracted from Ground Zero, trucked to salvage yards, where it was cut up for recycling. 50,000 tons of steel was loaded into barges and sold for scrap. Why wasn't all that steel dustified? The WTC site fumed for months and even years. Conventional smoke does not continue emerging from saturated dirt for months. She's probably right, but unconventional heat, like that from thermite in the basement core columns that can continue to react underwater, could make steam and white smoke for months. Dr. Wood studied a truck dumping material with some white stuff. According to her, that material cannot be steam or very hot. Another indication that there being no high heat is that the truck bed is being raised up by hydraulics. As discussed in Chapter 13, Weird Fires, hydraulic fluid temperatures above 82 C or 180 Fahrenheit will permanently damage hydraulic equipment. These fumes, lacking heat, must be composed of a gas and or very fine particulate that is not hot. Hot mix asphalt is typically around 300 degrees Fahrenheit, and dump trucks loaded with hot asphalt, as well as paving machines with hydraulics, work rather well with no permanent damage. Is it possible that truck was dumping hot material, giving off steam? What do you think? According to Dr. Wood, Ground Zero could not have been hot because the firefighters were spraying water over it, and that would be very dangerous. If there really is molten metal present in the raging fires beneath the rubble, then where are the steam explosions from the water being applied? Most everyone knows not to put water onto a grease or oil fire. Why not? If water is thrown onto a hot oil fire, the water will instantly heat up and become steam, expanding in a volume by about 1,600 times and producing an explosion. Were the firemen putting out grease fires? Why can I spray water on a hot bent blade without fear of it exploding? She also doesn't think the dust clouds were hot. During the destruction, there was an absence of high heat. Witnesses reported that the initial dust cloud felt cooler than the ambient temperatures. She said that no one reported having been burned by the dust cloud, except all these people who were there, and said it was real hot, getting second-degree burns and singed eyebrows. Maybe they were not remembering right? What do you think? Why is it that only paper that survived and not the office furniture and office equipment, she asked. Being office towers, there indeed was a lot of paper. Maybe some burned as well as a lot that didn't. Paper has considerable air resistance. Is it possible that it was blown out and eventually drifted down after the explosions, with some being burned and some surviving? Why didn't all this paper burn up in the fireball? She studied many cars that had been burned and had an epiphany about how that happened. I first realized that the mechanism of destruction of the WTC must have involved the interference of energy fields. This was my first aha moment. But it doesn't take exotic weapons or interference fields to toast cars. Strange burn patterns from ordinary car fires is quite common. If hot clouds with iron microspheres landed on your car, what do you think would happen? Did directed energy weapons do this to all these cars in the Mideast? No, it's collateral damage from a missile that hit the adjacent building. She tells us that pictures of a grapple excavating ground zero pulling up red glowing material can't be very hot. She informs us that hot things glow, but not everything that glows is hot. Consider a fluorescent light. Grapplers have hydraulic cylinders, and according to Dr. Wood, if there had been any molten steel in the rubble, it would have permanently damaged any excavation equipment encountering it. At a minimum, the hydraulics would immediately fail, and its moving parts would bond together or seize up. And water wasn't used to cool the equipment because water sprayed on an overheated car engine may likely crack the engine block. Using that logic, spaghetti tongs wouldn't work because our hands would burn from the boiling water. The reason why it works is because it takes considerable time to transfer heat through steel. This is why I can hold the end of this blade in my bare hands as I heat the other end red hot. I've used my loader to push and brush in many large fires. My backhoe doesn't have a hydraulic thumb, but my sister's excavator does. The hydraulics don't immediately fail and its moving parts don't seize up. Water won't just explode when used on fires or hot steel, which is why red-hot steel quenched in water won't explode. And why the moving parts of this loader didn't seize up. That grapple wasn't picking up fluorescent lights. Is it possible it was picking up red-hot steel? What do you think? Many saw molten metal.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel. Molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry.
Yeah, like lava.
Like lava.
But she doesn't believe those firemen, and like the lack of Epstein clients, she claims there was no molten steel. Now please note, in no way am I saying or implying that the fireman was lying about molten metal. On the other hand, memories are not like tape recorders, and there is no question but that memories can be manipulated. False memory syndrome refers to the creation of memories that are not based on factual events. Evidently, all those who spoke of molten metal and high heat had their memories manipulated, afflicted by false memory syndrome. Like this woman.
Out still on the rubble, it's still, I believe, 1100 degrees. The guy's boots just melt within a few hours.
Thermal images were taken at ground zero hotspots. She doesn't believe those thermal images either. If those hotspots were real, rescue workers at 400 to 800 degrees Celsius would have been instantly cooked, charred, and desiccated. Were those thermal images faked? What do you think? So where did the directed weapons get their energy? Dr. Wood suspects it came from Hurricane Erin, which was off the coast of New York that day. She notes the resemblance of a hurricane to a Tesla coil. Now let's look at the curious resemblance of a hurricane to a well-known technological invention, the Tesla coil. Not only that, but many morning weather reports neglected to mention Hurricane Erin. The reason? Its path was a carefully kept state secret. The use of directed energy technology on the huge scale of its use during 9/11 might very well have had weather-altering effects. Such technology might have been able to draw upon the vast energies and field effects of the enormous Tesla coil known as Hurricane Erin. Thoughts of this kind are justified, even necessitated by the fact of Erin's having been treated as a carefully kept secret, much like a state secret. She forgot to mention several weather reports that did show Erin, so that state secret wasn't very carefully kept. She also thinks Erin's track was deliberately steered away from ground zero. Was Aaron somehow steered away from New York City? Aaron did not gradually turn northward, but actually reversed direction. The paths of many hurricanes can vary wildly with loops, reversals, and zigzags, like Doria, Jean, Harvey, and Juan. Were those also steered with their free energy harnessed to power secret weapons? So where did the towers go? The official story wants you to believe that Building 7 was not a controlled demolition. Rather, they said it experienced an extraordinary event involving a new phenomenon with thermal expansion. As for the Twin Towers, NIST stopped their study before the towers even began to fall. They said it wasn't a pancake collapse, and they didn't test for explosives. No government study ever explained the actual fall of the towers, stating, "We are unable to provide a full explanation of the total collapse." Dr. Wood said that airplanes didn't hit the towers, but whatever caused those airplane-shaped holes affected the Earth's magnetic field in Alaska. The people were propelled off the towers by some electromagnetic force. The path of Hurricane Aaron was a state secret, acting like a giant Tesla coil, powering the hidden directed energy weapons. The dust went up, and high-tech explosive nanothermite chips naturally formed from the scrap, and all those microspheres could have been made by the same force that makes crop circles. After the steel was shot out and away from the footprints, almost all of it turned to dust while falling, and there was hardly any steel found at ground zero. The explosions heard were from the firemen's Scott packs blowing up. There was almost no smoke, no molten metal, and no significant heat, because if ground zero had any molten metal, it would have exploded from the water being applied. Equipment hydraulics would have instantly seized up if any part touched anything red hot, even for a short duration. There was, however, plenty of lather, squirts, fumes, and a Cheeto. Building 7 wasn't a controlled demolition, and the towers didn't explode out and down. They were dustified upward by invisible forces using free energy attacking all the buildings from an unknown direction by unknown weapons of an unknown number and unknown types from unknown locations. Or was Building 7 brought down in a classic controlled demolition? And were those towers destroyed by known high explosives and incendiaries, probably placed inside the towers during the floor renovations and elevator upgrades? Explosives that had enough energy to turn hundreds of acres of concrete floors and drywall into powder, blowing everything out into a huge debris field. Perhaps thermitic material was placed deep in the basement to weaken those massive core columns and continue to react underwater for months, heating the steel and soil above, generating steam and white smoke. It's difficult to explain the evidence without the airplane impact, explosives, and incendiaries. One is forced to resort to unproven technologies, vague explanations, false assumptions, uncorrelated coincidences, or far-fetched theories. The reason why she wondered where all the towers went is because there never was a big stack of pancaked floors. That's because those towers were exploded out and down, far away from their footprint. What if the reason why the government refused to test for explosive residue and she offered unbelievable explanations for those red-gray chips and iron microspheres was because they knew the answer to that question was written in the dust for all to see? What do you think?